What is redolent?
Redolent
Hey,
is,
I got you. Can I say Madeline Stevens?
She's online. She's online. She's on
Yes.
social.
And, Jacob Tyler.
All right. And you want to talk to her one time, or do you want
Yeah,
to-
just tell her, is she online?
Yes, she is, and I.
First stick. Okay, Maddie Stevens. You need to listen to this. This is very important.
Maddie? She's not on there, is she?
She's not. What were you, do you need to put something in chat to tell
You know
her?
what, I need the first day packet.
Okay.
I need it ASAP.
All
We
right.
don't have yours, where's yours at? Take it home, fill it out tonight, parent sign,
Miss
bring it to the
Riggs.
office.
I can
Yes.
text back real quick if you want me to and tell her.
Well, yeah, she needs to be where, we're beginning class where I can ask her
Okay.
things. Okay?
I'll
Thank you.
text
Just let
her and
her-
see where she's at.
Thank you.
Does she usually come to class or?
Yeah, she's either in class or on here.
Okay.
She's just not right there on the camera. Please bring your
okay, so I don't.
Thank you, Miss George. Okay, I put it in the chat for Maddie. I will let her know. Thank you. If you need one. Okay. Okay, guys, going over this. I was reviewing what is redolent. We did this in the library.
Sense of smell or something.
It has to do with smell, but what is it?
Aroma, maybe.
It is delightful, a delightful smell, something that is delightful, yes, delightful smell. What about bucolic?
How?
You might
Oh,
know.
that's old, like rusty.
Rustic countryside, sure, so probably a lot of redolent smells in the bucolic area. All right, what is diadem? Brown, immutable,
Unchangeable.
unchangeable, garish,
Flashy, extra.
flashy and extra, yes, to the point of being tasteless, right? It's that, you need to go ahead and bring it home where it's not the best taste. All right, what is emanate? Become forth and adulterate,
Make it good.
to make impure, and idolatry.
I worship without knowing,
Perfect. Yes. So, all right, impecunious. We're going to go ahead and read our sentences today. And as always, my virtual people, we love it when you chime in. It lets us know that you are interacting, and it really helps out a lot. So, Sierra, would you like to read your sentence?
Even when I'm impecunious, I still carry my pride very high.
Very nice. And again, impecunious is without money or broke, right? Very good, Sierra. All right, Abigail. You want to read yours, Abigail? Abigail may not want to read hers. Okay. Oh, that's okay, Maddie. That's all right. Just so you got the message. Thank you. Okay, so Abigail, do you want to read your sentence? She might not be able to. Okay, guys, listen. Abigail writes, I've seen impecunious people on the road. I wonder why they don't ask for help. Very nice. Perfect use of semicolon there. All right, Brennan. The girl's family was impecunious, so she started working when she was 15 to help them. Okay, so I'm going to just put the comma there. Two separate sentences joined by so, the coordinating conjunction. Great. Daniel, as he grew up in an impecunious household, he knew much about surviving on very little. Very good. Grant, would you like to read yours? It doesn't matter how impecunious the man is. Don't say that to him again. Or aging. Let's see, again. That's okay. No, again. All right, Tyler.
People who grew up in a ridiculous household sometimes end up being successful in emotional relations.
Perfect. Very good sentence. All right, Caden. LeBron James grew up very impecunious, and now he's one of the highest paid NBA players. Very excellent. I'm going to put a comma after impecunious. Logan, very good. Jacob, the impecunious man was asking for money. Jonah, after the man quit his job, he became impecunious. And Braden,
Sorry, they was left impecunious after paying their bills.
very good. And Robert, it is very hard in the world when you are impecunious. Yes, very good. All right, sedition. Again, what is sedition? To riot, specifically against the government, to rebel or riot. All right, Sierra, would you please read your sentence?
Once the new law was in order, many civilians charged with sedition at the courthouse.
Yes, many civilians, absolutely. All right, and Abigail, I don't know if Abigail.
Ms. Briggs, I can read it, yeah. Sorry, I got kicked out because my internet wasn't working, but I'm okay now.
Thank you. I knew you normally did, but I thought there might have been an issue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sedition is wrong, and you are most likely to get in legal trouble for it.
Perfect. And Daniel writes, the newspaper editor was accused of sedition when he encouraged his fans to rise up against police officers. Good. The guy was arrested for sedition when he was protesting outside the courthouse. Tyler, you want to read yours, Tyler?
Once the new law was made, many protesters were charged with sedition.
Perfect. And Jacob writes, the people in Minneapolis were seditioning. And Grant, the BLM movement, all right, is a sedition. And Logan, okay, yes. So again, guys, sedition means where you're rebelling against the government, right? All right, Jonah, the Boston Tea Party was a sedition. Yes, perfect. And Robert, the Civil War was a sedition. Very good. We're going to capitalize Civil War. That's all right, because it's that one, particular war. Okay, guys, great. Test is Friday, okay? So tomorrow we'll have 2 more words. Wednesday, 3. We'll review. I'm going to make the Kahoot, and we will play, and then we'll have our test on Friday. All right, so now what we're doing, you guys need to go ahead and get your notes out. This is your, what is it called? Your journal. Your journal, and you are looking at, these are Journal 6, 5 facts notes from Dr. Moslow's first video on the Canterbury Tales. So guys, I'm thinking today we might finish all of them. There's just 2, and you already have like a few minutes into one. So we will get those finished and we can start reading the tales tomorrow. Everybody in here is going to be assigned a pilgrim to research. It's going to be kind of like quick research like we did last time. Notes from Dr. Moslow. Yes, video. And then response, your final response 5 for this will be again 5 facts. Now I'm thinking you guys already have your 5 from the other day, am I right? Thinking you probably do.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the Canterbury Tales. We are actually 3 minutes and 9 seconds into the video. So again, my virtual people, I'm hoping that you can follow along. If not, this is what we're doing the rest of the period. And I don't know, 10, 15, probably will take the rest of the period. So just let me know if you have internet trouble and you need to just watch it on your own. Again, we're watching the 3 and we're taking notes, any 5 notes or facts from each video. I'm going to go ahead and start.
Miss Briggs,
Yes.
you keep cutting out really bad, so is there any way I could just watch them on my own?
Absolutely. Yes, that's what I'm saying right now, that if you need to just get out of this and go into, if you go to see where I'm showing you, it's under Canterbury Tales, and I have them each listed here. Video 1, podcast 1, podcast 2, podcast 3. They're roughly 15 minutes long. And then you just put your notes in the journal. That'll be fine. If you guys, my virtual, need to do that, just make sure that you are doing these notes because they'll be one of the first grades on second quarter. Second quarter starting, well, first quarter's ending Wednesday. So I guess you can look at it like second quarter starting Thursday or second quarter starting Wednesday. But anyway, please make sure you do all your notes. My answer is yes. You can certainly do that. Just let me know either in the chat or email me if you're going to get off and do that. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? All right, so we're going to go ahead and go to the podcast. And we're 3 minutes, 9 seconds into it. How many do not have all of their 5 notes from this
Three
one?
tails.
How many do not have all of them? Okay, so I will need to watch you closely and stop so you can make sure you're getting your notes down. Logan, how many do you have?
4.
4. Okay, great. So you're just needing that 5th one. We stopped right here on William the Conqueror. So I'm going to go ahead and start here.
William of Normandy, soon to be known as William the Conqueror, led the Norman invasion of Britannia in 1066. He was actually related to the Anglo-Saxon kings that he conquered,
Sorry.
and he was spurred to action by the belief that he was entitled to the crown. His aim, therefore, was to conquer the Anglo-Saxons, not to eliminate them. In December of 1066, he would name himself William I, the King of Angoland. Within 5 years, he took control of nearly all of Britannia, which he would rule, never without difficulty, until his death in 1087. With the ascendancy of William to the throne, French culture and the French language would dominate the island of Britannia for the next 300 years. In fact, the Normans would never leave the island, instead merging with the Anglo-Saxons to become the English that we think of today. So let's take a look at the society of the Middle Ages. Broadly speaking, medieval society could be divided into 3 main categories, known as the 3 estates: the aristocracy, the clergy, also known as the church, and the peasantry. Over the 350-year course of the Middle Ages, the balance of power would shift subtly and ever so slightly away from the aristocracy and the clergy, moving towards the peasantry. So let's
Yes.
take a look at the aristocracy.
I can go back and stop for just right here.
Ages, the balance.
Go. And this is important because the pilgrims are all going to be, guys, they're going to be in one of those categories. And we're actually going to add, when we do our pilgrims, when I assign you the pilgrims, we'll add another class he doesn't mention. We'll add a trade class and a middle class to that. So trade and middle, it's clergy and then middle and then trade and then peasant. So pilgrims are going to be divided into those categories. And you're going to basically, everyone will get a pilgrim, and you will look up what that pilgrim, like what their job title, what it means, what they did. A lot of them work in the church. You'll need to look and see what they do in church. And then some are simply like the miller. What does he do? You know, he takes in the grain, things like that. There's also a sailor or a shipman, and you'll see what he does. Just all different kinds of people. What? Keep it paused, sure. I've got to get my TV caught up. I'm going to read. I don't read. I've got 26 in one day. They're always going to be, there's right many. There's 29 people in TV. They have to quickly share their research, but we're almost finished with that. But we're just going to have to go. I may have to cut out one more doctor. I hate to, but it's just not, it's so short. It's easier. I want for y'all to be close to what each other's doing. Everybody ready? Everybody good? Okay.
Balance of power would shift subtly and ever so slightly away from the aristocracy and the clergy, moving towards the peasantry. So let's take a look at the aristocracy. One of William's most important initiatives was the commissioning of an inventory of British property and possessions known as the Domesday Book. William's people scoured the cities and the countryside, counting every landowner, every peasant, every building, every chicken, every cow, every bushel of wheat. This inventory would allow William to collect taxes. The more someone owned, the more money William could demand of him. The entire Domesday Book is now online, and it's a pretty fascinating read. And if you were to read it, the one thing that would strike you almost immediately is that anyone who owned anything of consequence had a Norman name. That is to say, was a member of the Norman aristocracy. And virtually no one who owned anything of consequence had an Anglo-Saxon name. In a mere 20 years, the entire Anglo-Saxon ruling class had been eliminated, replaced by an entirely new ruling class from Normandy. So it should be no surprise then to learn that with the Norman conquest, French became the language of the aristocracy. It was a rough country dialect of French, not the fancy stuff they spoke in Paris, but it was definitely French. And it was the official language of the British royal court and the official language of the British state. At the same time, in farmhouses and fields across the island, Anglo-Saxon was still spoken by the rural people and the peasantry. Spoiler alert, what happens to the French language that the aristocrats speak and the Anglo-Saxon language that the peasants speak will be the subject of our next video podcast. So let's take a moment to consider a term that you already know from your history class, feudalism. Feudalism, of course, was a comprehensive hierarchical system of social, political, and economic relationships. It claims God as its ultimate authority, which of course is a clever and effective thing to do if you just happen to be the king. We won't go over the particulars of this system here, but we will acknowledge now that it is a top-down system of power with virtually no chance of mobility between its various levels, especially the lower levels.
Yes, go back.
The primary obligation of anyone,
This page right
but we
here.
will acknowledge
This one. This is the first one. It'll go faster than we And then this is, I don't have any more after this. This will be the only last 2.5 we see. Everybody ready? Everybody good to go?
now that it is a top-down system of power with virtually no chance of mobility between its various levels, especially the lower levels. The primary obligation of anyone in the middle levels, anyone who was not a serf, was military. The knight was the symbol of the feudal system, and the idea of loyalty was central to an entire series of social behaviors and codes. To break any of these codes was to risk the welfare not only of oneself, but that of the entire system as a whole. If you're detecting the not-so-subtle whiff of comitatus here, don't be surprised. The dramatic concept of comitatus was the blueprint for the feudal system of the Middle Ages. Like so many other things in England during the Middle Ages, feudalism was an import from France. Introduced by William immediately after the Norman conquest, feudalism held sway for several centuries, but would slowly begin to erode over time as ordinary people gained greater control over their lives. Let's talk about the role of women in medieval England. Under the feudal system, one important aspect of aristocratic conduct was the chivalric code. The chivalric code demanded loyalty to one's lord and determined behavior on the battlefield, but it also elevated women to an ideal, an image of perfection that was impossible to achieve. At the heart of the chivalric code was the idea of courtly love, which held that a knight acts most bravely and most honorably when he does so in the name of a lady. Courtly love is the subject of hundreds of medieval stories. Perhaps most famous of these are the Arthurian romances detailing the exploits of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Since the idea of courtly love probably came,
I'm gonna stop right here.
courtly love is
Go. the code of chivalry, or the chivalric code. Courtly love was one of our words, but this class is small. I don't think we didn't have enough people to do all the terms, so it was one we missed. Are we good to go or not? Everybody ready? Yes.
Is the subject of hundreds of medieval stories. Perhaps most famous of these are the Arthurian romances detailing the exploits of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Since the idea of courtly love probably came from a Christian cult that worshipped Jesus' mother, the Virgin Mary, there was one teensy-weensy little catch to this whole thing. The relationship between the knight and the lady had to be non-sexual. A knight could wear his lady's colors on the battlefield. He could glorify her in poetry. He could draw inspiration from her in 100 different ways. But if he violated her purity with physical love, the whole social fabric unravels. This is precisely what happens in the story of the Knights of the Round Table, when Lancelot and Guinevere get a little too close, and it destroys the entire social system that they represent. The reality for women in the Middle Ages differed considerably from the stuff of legend and lore. Aristocrat or serf, if you were a woman, your place in society was rather narrowly defined. Your first and primary duty was not to maintain your virginity forever, but to fulfill the demands of reproduction once you were sexually mature enough to do so. Peasant women were childbearers first and foremost, with the duties of the house and the field a close second. Aristocratic women, too, were expected to produce lots and lots of children, and while they would oversee the house rather than clean it for themselves, they, too, had no real place outside of these roles. In all cases, women depended heavily on their spouses for support. Also looming large in the Middle Ages were the Crusades. European Christianity's 3.5 centuries long series of holy wars against Muslims would begin shortly after the Norman conquest and end in the decades after Chaucer's death in the year 1400. Ultimately, the quest to take Jerusalem was unsuccessful, but the effect that the Crusades had on life at home would be immense. Let's take a look at that now. As Europeans went east, they made contact with Arabic cultures, establishing trade and bringing back both consumer goods and new forms of knowledge. These helped cities such as London to grow, thus offering an alternative to the feudal system. One major source of urban growth was trade. As soldiers and traders returned from eastern lands with a wide array of consumer goods, teas and spices and fabrics and foods, a new and important group of people emerges, the merchant class. With each passing decade, the merchant class's economic and social power grows, and they become highly influential members of society. During the Middle Ages, large groups of craftsmen and merchants often grouped together to form guilds. A guild is an association of people of a similar occupation who join together because they share a common interest or a goal. In addition, contact with the Middle East led to the acquisition of new forms of knowledge, especially in the sciences, mathematics, and architecture. As a result, European cities became centers of learning. In the 13th century, London saw the founding of 2 universities, Oxford and Cambridge. They offered a challenge to the traditional European institutions of learning, the Christian monasteries. And speaking of monasteries, things were changing within the church as well. By now you all know about the murder of St. Thomas of Becket, the Norman who had risen to great power as both Prime Minister and the Archbishop of Canterbury under King Henry II. Thomas was an independent and combative sort of fellow, and this, in conjunction with his loyalty to the Pope, distressed Henry quite a bit. Henry may or may not have uttered those infamous words, "Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?" And even if he did, he may or may not have been serious. Whatever the facts, two things are certain. The assassination of Thomas in the Cathedral at Canterbury generated an immense amount of sympathy for the church, giving it a renewed cultural power. And this power in turn allowed its members to take unprecedented liberties, leading to corruption at every level of the church. The Middle Ages also saw the creation of a document that would eventually create a more equitable and democratic society. The Magna Carta was signed by John of Runnymede in 1215, and while it is true that it was designed to protect the interests of the aristocracy, it became the basis for English constitutional law and the development of the British legal system. In its broadening to establish the rights of all Britons, the Magna Carta ensured the right to a trial by jury and a legislative system of taxation, and it was an important step in the dissolution of feudal society. It also led to the creation of a legal profession by the middle of the 14th century. By the time that Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales, lawyers were a regular feature on the social landscape. In addition to the growth of cities and the broadening of rights to all citizens, another blow to feudalism was the Black Plague of 1348. Chaucer lived through the plague as a child, and the outbreak killed between 30 and 50% of Britain's population. This caused a massive labor shortage that gave the working people considerable leverage over their overlords, and eventually led to the emancipation of the serfs. Deprived of its nearly free labor power, the feudal system was weakened considerably as the 14th century came to a close. These were not the only small d democratic developments as the Middle Ages came to an end. The 100 Years' War, which actually lasted 116 years, but who's counting, may have been militarily unsuccessful, but because it was fought against the French, it gave Britons a sense of national identity, allowing them to think of themselves as something more than Anglo-Norman. The symbol of this new national identity was the yeoman, who, with his longbow and his arrows, formed the nucleus of the English army during the 100 Years' War. The yeoman was an independent, small landowning farmer whose yard-long arrows could fly over castle walls and even pierce armor. Clad in green and ever ready to defend his own interests rather than those of his god or his king, he replaced the knight in the national imagination as the symbol of English military might. With the yeoman, the feudal system finally faded away, and an increasingly democratic England lay ahead. That concludes this video podcast on Chaucer and the historical context of the Canterbury Tales.
All right, so guys, that's one. We've got time. We may not finish the second one, but we can certainly get into it. So you'll need, again, 5 notes. Let's get our journal, make sure everybody's paying attention. And I have got to start using my GoGuardian. I'm not doing a very good job of that. I've got to remember to do that. It just keeps us all on our where we should be. So here's the second one.
Unlike the I am, which is...
All right, so it's on into that. Here we go. And I'm going to skip his little introduction because we know what he says. Okay.
Born into a well-to-do merchant family in 1343, toward the end of the Middle Ages.
Oh, let me go back just to here. Here we go.
Let's begin. Geoffrey Chaucer was born into a well-to-do merchant family in 1343, toward the end of the Middle Ages. Thanks to his family's position, he had an excellent education, and he studied law before careers in both the military and public service. Through his family and his occupations, he made connections with people at every level of English society.
Do I need to pause? Yeah. Oops. He's so fast on those. Okay. Because, I mean, if you wanted to, you could get your 5 right there. All about Chaucer. If you want to, but I'm not forcing you.
It's almost too easy.
I know. This is the first, well, no, we read Sir Thomas Mallory's part of his Lamort Author, but I was going to say Beowulf, we don't know who wrote it for sure, we have no name, and then Sir Gawain, we have no name associated with that either, so it's like we have our name for Chaucer. You guys ready to go? Everybody finished with this note? Anybody still writing? No?
Patients, he made connections with people at every level of English society. Chaucer wrote a great deal of poetry throughout his adult life, sometimes for his own amusement and the amusement of his friends, but just as often for pay, as part of the patronage system in which wealthy noblemen would pay artists to produce works for their private collections. As a writer, Chaucer took full advantage of his education, his exposure to many facets of English society, and, as you will learn in Lesson 3, the fact that the language in which he was writing had grown immensely in the previous 3 centuries. So let's take a look at Chaucer's most well-known poem, The Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is the story of a group of people who are going on a religious pilgrimage. The pilgrimage begins at the Tabard Inn, located in the London suburb of Southwark.
Yes.
The destination is
This one right here?
a known poem.
They're going to Thomas à Becket Shrine, as he had been murdered in the cathedral. What time of year do you think they would go? Now think about this. This is the 1200s. What time of year would they take a pilgrimage? Like go, would they have to travel like this on horses and? No, what time of year?
Spring.
Spring, absolutely. Why spring?
Because it's ice cold.
That's right. Unlike Sir Gawain, who had to go, what is it, around Christmas? Yeah, it's tough. Okay, am I good to push play now? Everybody? You good?
The Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is the story of a group of people who are going on a religious pilgrimage. The pilgrimage begins at the Tabard Inn, located in the London suburb of Southwark. The destination is the shrine of St. Thomas à Becket at the Canterbury Cathedral in Canterbury. The time is April. We know that for sure. We also know that Chaucer set the story in the year that he was writing it, which we believe to be 1387. The pilgrims are on horseback, but they're traveling at a walking pace in a single large group. At this rate, the trip will take them 4 days each way. There are 30 pilgrims on the trip, including the narrator, whose name just happens to be Geoffrey Chaucer. It is important that you understand that the narrator is a character in his own story. And even if he has the same name as the poet, you should never confuse the two. Chaucer, the narrator, is naive and doesn't always see things for what they really are. Chaucer, the poet, on the other hand, is wise, and he wants you to see things that his narrator does not see. In addition to the 30 pilgrims, there is Harry Bailey, who owns the Tabard Inn. As the host, Bailey escorts the pilgrims on the trip. It's his job to keep them entertained and happy. Each pilgrim is a type, a broad representation of a group of people, and is called by the occupation or station in society that he or she represents: the nun, the plowman, the doctor, the monk, etc. As you read, pay close attention to each pilgrim's speech, physical features, behavior, possessions, and dress.
And that's what you'll be researching, one of your pilgrims.
Together, the pilgrims represent a wide swath of English society, from aristocrats to peasants, and from the clergy to the new middle class. Now that you know some of the basic facts, let me tell you a bit about the premise and the overall structure of the Canterbury Tales. As we've learned, the pilgrims are taking this trip at a walking pace, and it's going to take about 4 days. In order to pass the time, Harry Bailey suggests that they play a storytelling game. Each pilgrim will tell 4 stories while they're on the road. That's 2 stories going to Canterbury and 2 more stories coming back to London. Bailey will judge the stories, and the best one will win a meal when they get back to the Tabard Inn. A meal paid for, of course, by the losing pilgrims. Before I move forward, I need to define an important literary term, frame tale. In certain works of narrative art, literature, theater, and film, a frame tale is a story that brings the audience into another story, the main story. The frame tale is a pretty common narrative device. If you've ever seen The Princess Bride, you know exactly how this works. The frame tale is the story of the little boy and the grandfather, and the main story, the story of Wesley and Princess Buttercup, is the story that the grandfather tells. In the Canterbury Tales, the frame tale is called the general prologue. Although it is the most important part of the Canterbury Tales, and the most interesting, nothing really happens in it. Most of the general prologue, in fact, consists of the narrator's observations and impressions of the other pilgrims on the trip. The ending of the general prologue sets the first tale, which is told by the knight, and as the pilgrims make their way to Canterbury, other tales follow, some of which have prologues of their own. In this class, we are going to read the general prologue and 1 tale.
We're going to read 2 tales in here. So
Now, if you do the math, this is a pretty ambitious project. There are 30 pilgrims, and each one is supposed to tell 4 stories for a total of 120 stories. That's an awful lot of poetry. Unfortunately, Chaucer never lived to see the project through to completion. He worked on the Canterbury Tales on and off for nearly 13 years, all the while creating other equally amazing poems. In the end, he managed to create the general prologue, 23 tales, and 1 fragment before his death in the year 1400. Although incomplete, the Canterbury Tales stands as one of the greatest achievements of English literary history. So with the premises and the structure of the Canterbury Tales in mind, let's take a look at some of the things that you should know about how to read the poem. Much of what we'll cover here applies to many other poems as well. The Canterbury Tales is written mostly in iambic pentameter. In Chaucer's day, it was a new way to write in verse, and Chaucer helped to popularize it. Now you have no doubt heard of iambic pentameter. Almost everyone who has ever studied poetry in school has. But far fewer people actually know what it means, or why so much English language poetry is written in it. So let's take a look at the term more closely, with an eye towards using that knowledge to become better readers. The term iambic pentameter really describes 2 aspects of a poem. Its rhythm, which is the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in each line, and its length, which is the number of syllables in each line. When we measure the rhythm and the length of a line of poetry, the basic unit of measurement is called a metric.
guys, who's moaning in here? Somebody's moaning. Moaning.
And unstressed syllables in each.
It's very unnerving. I don't know who's doing it. But if you need to go to the nurse, I'll can send an email and go send somebody to the nurse if somebody's hurting. Oh, it says Monday. We're all hurting to it in a way. Yeah, okay. All right. It's almost, let's find a good stopping place here, guys. We'll stop
line,
for tech time.
And its length, which is the length of a line of poetry. The basic unit of measurement is called a metric foot. Metric feet generally consist of either 2 or 3 syllables each. With that in mind, let's take a look at rhythm first. An iamb is a 2-syllable metric foot consisting of 1 unstressed syllable and 1 stressed syllable. Da-dum. The iamb is one of 5 major stress patterns. 3 of these are disyllabic, which is
Right here? No. Right here.
These are disyllabic, which is this.
Was it this one? Okay.
Which is the number of
Right there. I went too far. Was it, you just need I am, or do you need? You just need this one, or? Was it this one? No? Okay. You're okay. This one? No? Ah, this one.
unstressed syllable.
There we go. Guys, we're going to stop there. I'm going to stop at 8:01. We'll start there tomorrow. Now, guys, listen. I'm hoping everyone's getting your 5, and then we'll finish, and then we'll have that one more, that last one, for the notes. That's it. This is helping us, though, as we do the 3 canterbury tales, the prologue and the 2 tales already. So we'll not start reading until you guys do your quick research on your pilgrim. It won't take long at all. It didn't take as long as the other. The other took, the quick research on, which was Ryan. Well, but this is quick, this is visually, I'm looking it up, and I'm going to write it down, and, well, I'm not gonna do a slide, but it won't, I think I am gonna do a slide, but that won't take long at all, one slide. Guys, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. I'm gonna go ahead and stop for today. Oops. Stop recording.